very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Shouldn't we all daily ask ourselves why we're here? Shouldn't we ask ourselves what difference we wish to make in the world, for the world? A 2,000-year-old quote from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus. First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. We must take such steps if we wish to make a difference in the world. This is Dane Wigington with the weekly edition of Geoengineering Watch Radio, the Global Alert News Hour for February 18th, 2017. Commercial-free news hour program brought to you by GeoengineeringWatch.org, trying to cover as much of the critical news as we can because the corporate media broadcasting is not giving that to us. This show is broadcast on KQMS throughout Northern California, 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM. Recordings of the show can be found on GeoengineeringWatch.org under the top stories, recent, and radio sections, and on the KQMS archives. Weekly reminder, free materials at Orchard Nutrition in Redding. If you live in Shasta County, all we ask is please make the most of these materials. We supply them as we can with the resources that we have. We simply must all work together to get the word out, to wake the population up to just how rapidly the walls are closing in around us. Again, that's Orchard Nutrition in Redding. Follow up on Calvary Chapel story from last week. Calvary Chapel that aired the Vaxxed film on February 9th in Chino, California. It's my understanding that they don't intend to follow up on that effort, and I hope that that's not the case. And since that happened, I sent materials to a representative from that particular group. I've heard nothing back, and I also sent a message to someone very high up with the Calvary community that I know personally very well, in the hopes that they will follow up and focus on the climate engineering issue as well. I have heard nothing from that individual either. I will hope that this is not a one-time event with Calvary, that this effort has not already been suppressed and put down. I'll hope that that's not the case, because that has been the case with every other major spiritual institution and environmental institutions, none of whom are truly addressing some of the most critical issues on our planet. So I'll hope that Calvary follows up on that, and I'll update as I hear anything, if I hear anything. A library announcement for Redding, final announcement, then I'll get to what we need to get at to try to find out where we're at in the world that's disintegrating around us. Library announcement, Shasta County, Redding Library, today, 3:30 to 5:30. There'll be another documentary film viewing. The title is Knocking on the Devil's Door, Our Deadly Nuclear Legacy by Gary Knoll. Gary Knoll has done a tremendous amount for the common good, from vaccinations to exposing the nuclear disasters that are closing in on us, Fukushima being at the top of the list at the moment, but much more to follow on that. There'll be free materials there as well. I'll be there for Q&A from 5 to 5:30. Now is the time we must decide why we're here. And the only way we can understand what it is we need to do is to understand what's happening around us. So that's what the attempt we're trying to follow through with at the Redding Library. Corporate media gives us constant coverage of countless distractions, but what news do we receive from the front lines of our planet's imploding life support systems from corporate media? Nothing. Let's get to some headlines. A lot to cover today. There's far too much to cover in 55 minutes, even without commercials, but we'll try. The overly inflated, completely artificial stock market continues. This is really a rerun. It will be a rerun until total collapse happens, because the power structure will try to hide the severity of what's unfolding from the population until the last possible moment. Here's a few headlines, though. Venezuela hyperinflation continues to accelerate. Their currency is worthless there. The same will happen elsewhere. It is happening in other countries now. It will accelerate around the globe. Another headline. Brazil retail sales collapse as inflation and unemployment hammer consumers. Doesn't sound like a thriving global economy there, does it? Another headline, Greece defies creditors over more cuts as economy shrinks unexpectedly. Well, we should expect it. When you have a biosphere imploding around you on all sides, how can you possibly have perpetual growth? This whole paradigm, this whole human construct of a very delusional notion of perpetual growth on a finite planet with finite resources. Another headline, Greek bank run re-accelerates massive deposit withdrawals despite capital controls. Another headline, U.S. industrial production tumbles. Another headline, globalists strike back with major push toward a cashless society. It's all about control. It's all about power and control. People ask over and over again, relating to climate engineering, for example, why? Why would they do this? Because people still live under the delusion that those in power are there to serve us. That is absolutely not the case. Climate engineering is about power and control, ultimately. A lot of aspects to it. Many people don't look at all those aspects, and they should. Very complex scenario, but ultimately, at the core, about power and control. The same as trying to make cashless societies so that they can control what everyone does. Another headline, Syria war news. U.S. military used depleted uranium that causes cancer and birth defects. These are stories our mainstream media does not tell us. Gulf War syndrome, vaccinations, and depleted uranium, two of the most likely causes there. 180,000 of our troops sickened, injured from what our military did to them. They are nothing but cannon fodder, and I hope that our military brothers and sisters understand what they're being used for and that those in power don't care about them. How many circumstances do we need to drive this point home? It's not about freedom, it's not about democracy, it's about power and control. Another headline, Saudis slaughter more women and children in U.S.-backed war in Yemen. Most powerful country in the world, helping to decimate one of the poorest countries in the world, Yemen, backing the terrorist nation of Saudi Arabia, supplying them weapons. Saudi Arabia that is given a free ride on everything, because that's where the oil's coming from. This is not hard to connect if we simply make the effort to connect the dots. Another headline, Pentagon may recommend deploying U.S. ground troops to Syria. Yet another country, part of the grand chessboard, toppled. It's about power and control. It's about U.S. hegemonic control around the globe. But it's breaking down. Much of the rest of the world has had enough. They understand how things got this far off track, being the dollar being the global reserve currency, being a primary means by which things went so far off the rails because those in power could print whatever they want. I still hear from people that think if we just stop paying our tax dollars, everything would come to a halt. This is not reality. That's an illusion as well. The taxation of the population is part of the means by which they are controlled because they are kept mired in a system that keeps them on the treadmill 24/7. This is not to say that we should all be consuming everything we can with no burden on us and no responsibility to the whole, but when we know they can print whatever they want, for whatever they want, the taxation system is simply one more means of control. Another headline, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis rejects military collaboration with Russia. I really want to elaborate on this because how much of what we think is reality is still only an illusion. This conflict between nations, even going back to World War II, who was at the core of all of that? Who funded all of it? The central bankers. Who benefited from it? The central bankers. Does that mean the war didn't happen? No. It happened. And unimaginable amounts of people died. Get the same thing with climate engineering, that people think that this is all simply about making profit. No, it's much bigger. Our planet is imploding, and those in power are trying to hide that with the weapon they have used for their own purposes, a weapon of war, manipulating the climate. But does that mean the damage to the planet is not real? Of course not. It's real. And climate engineering is making it worse, just like wars are real, even though people make money off them. But how much of those power centers that are in conflict, how much of that is an illusion and how much is orchestrated? All major powers are colluding and collaborating on the criminal climate engineering issue, for example. So on that note, I want to read an excerpt from a 750-page Senate document from 1978 that anyone can read in its entirety at geoengineeringwatch.org. In fact, you can just search Geoengineering Massive Senate Document, and you will find this document, and it is incredibly damning in so many ways, verifying that global climate weather modification / weather warfare, because the two are inseparable, has been going on all over the planet for 7+ decades at significant scale. When we have Senate documents, how can anybody rationally deny this? It's not rational. But yet we have so many that are so committed to the cancer that they feel supports them, whether their job at an agency, at a media company, as an order follower, in an official agency. They are too committed to look at facts. They are too committed to acknowledge facts. They're too committed to what they perceive to be their own personal scenario to tell the truth. So, an excerpt from a 750-page Senate document that you can find at geoengineeringwatch.org. The title of this particular chapter is International Aspects of Weather Modification. Small excerpt. Speaking about the cooperation between normally opposing nations, i.e. Russia, China, the US. Weather research and reporting has long been one of the areas having the closest international cooperation. This cooperation transcends ideological differences and hostilities. International cooperation in the exchange and methods of weather modification has been extensive. What does that mean? It means all the major powers are colluding and collaborating on the ongoing global climate modification insanity, playing God with Earth's life support systems at the expense ultimately of all life on Earth, each country doing it for its own particular purposes. And those purposes are complex. They are not simple. It's not a this or that equation. What we face is very complex. The damage done to the planet is very complex. And for those who want to believe that the only major source of damage is climate engineering, that is absolutely not true. Anybody who bothers to look at the decimation that's been caused to the planet from countless forms by the human race and human activity, it's not hard to see that we've been very poor stewards of the planet. But that being said, the single greatest assault is still climate engineering, and all the major powers are colluding and collaborating. And I would ask this again: where are the environmental groups? Where are the spiritual communities and institutions? Where are they? How can anyone claim to care about the environment and at the same time completely ignore and deny what's mathematically, as I stated, the single greatest environmental assault of all? More headlines that relate to climate engineering, that relate to the planet's ability to support life, that relates to, thus, all of our futures. Headline: India and China make up 52% of early deaths due to air pollution. From that report, India is close to displacing China as the nation where the most people die of air pollution. India and China account for more than half the world's premature deaths due to air pollution, a new report said on Tuesday. Noting that India's lives lost to the tiny particulate matter, PM, particle matter, is approaching China's numbers. Now, they're referring to PM 2.5 here, 2.5 microns. U.S. air testing equipment measures PM 10 and PM 2.5, but the air pollution from climate engineering, as we know from testing, as we know from patents, is exponentially smaller. It is not detected by current detecting mechanisms, so it goes virtually under the radar. That means that we are all inhaling mountains of materials, which is not speculation, it's not hypothesis, it's not theory. We have lab tests from around the country and around the world to prove this. Mountains of material are coming down in our precipitation, which means it's in our breathable air column, which means we're inhaling it. And is it any wonder that we have exponential explosions in respiratory ailment, dementia, Alzheimer's, autism, also related to vaccinations, of course. The equations are complex, all of them. It's not just this or that. Everything's interrelated, everything interacts. But we have massive amounts of mortality already occurring from, and have been occurring, from the atmospheric saturation of highly toxic particles related to climate engineering, and yet we hear no one, not one voice from the climate science community a community that has utterly and totally betrayed global populations and the web of life in so many ways by their silence on this issue. And we have a climate science community that is discussing geoengineering all over the globe, none of them admitting it's happening, and none of them admitting, even in their modeling, that, by the way, what they're proposing to spray, which they're already spraying, will settle down to ground level where everyone gets to absorb it and inhale it. Not one word. How can we have a so-called science community that leaves that out? And more damning information from the science community, damning towards themselves, I'll cover in a moment. Again, not enough time to cover what I need to cover in this program, so I'm going to stick to the primary elements on which our future survival depends. Headline: Summer in February in the Arctic. Temperatures surged 63 degrees Fahrenheit in 24 hours, northern Greenland. Why is it so important? Why are the poles so important? Because they regulate the Earth's climate system, and there are massive amounts of methane, frozen methane, that's thawing and migrating into the atmosphere, through the water column, to the sea surface, and into the atmosphere. As the ice caps disintegrate, the oceans absorb more heat, more methane releases. If that process continues, it's game over. That's simple. From this report about the 63-degree temperature rise in 24 hours in northern Greenland, the weather whiplash that's occurring all over the globe, further fueled by climate engineering. The report states this: the temperature at the northernmost land station in the world, located on the northern coast of Greenland, soared to a remarkable 35 degrees Fahrenheit on Wednesday, beating the previous day's high of negative 22 by a shocking 57 degrees, and marking a temperature more typical of June. The mercury skyrocketed an astonishing 63 degrees Fahrenheit in just 24 hours on February 8th. 63-degree change in one day. And we're seeing that all over the globe. How is this happening? Because the planet is superheating. The climate engineers are further fueling this in their attempt to hide the problem and to use weather as a weapon, which they've done both for 70 plus years. None of us, very few of us alive today, have known truly natural weather. Historical fact proves this. The Senate document I just outlined, one more factor that proves this. We have presidential documents. We have patents going back to 1920. There's a mountain of data to prove that our skies have been manipulated. Climate intervention programs, as they are now called, at a significant scale for over 70 years. Again, I would state very few of us alive today on this planet have known truly natural weather. Headline from Forbes. Some of the mainstream sources that are now having to cover what's happening because they can't hide it any longer. This is from Forbes. Quote, "This is not good. Sea ice at both poles, North and South Pole, at record lows." If you hear data from the front lines and you hear people talking about the coming ice age, I hear this all the time. And I challenge people, can you back up what you're stating, or did you just see a headline and accept it at face value? Do some frontline research. And I'm not saying you should accept this headline from Forbes. What I'm saying is you should look at frontline film footage and make up your mind based on what you see with your own eyes. Search Chasing Ice and watch that film and try to deny what you see. You can't. It's frontline film footage of the cryosphere, the ice deposits around the globe disappearing. And now mainstream media is having to cover that because they can't hide it any longer. And the goal of the climate engineers is to confuse and divide populations by creating toxic, chemically cooled weather events, chemical cool downs, engineered snowstorms that I've announced week after week. Other countries doing it. They're all collaborating, as I just went over. In the meantime, the planet continues to unravel. Another headline, Antarctica just shed a Manhattan-sized chunk of ice. From that report, ice around the continent is disappearing as the air and water heat up, and the less dramatic breakdowns are just as important to understanding the fate of the ice and the world's coastal areas. A much larger piece of ice is near breaking off in Antarctica on the Larsen Sea Shelf. The crack is some 100 miles long. It looks like something out of the Day After Tomorrow movie. It's happening now. Look it up. Please don't believe me. Just investigate. Now, this headline goes with what I stated earlier, the betrayal of the quote-unquote science community that is so far from reality in so many cases that how could they possibly hold a degree or claim to be an expert in any subject? Here's a proposal from the climate science community to try to address the fact that the poles are melting. This proposal addresses the Arctic, the North Pole. Here's the headline. This is from The Guardian. Could a 500 billion plan to refreeze the Arctic before the ice melts really work? From that report, temperatures are now so high in the North Pole that scientists are contemplating radical schemes to avoid catastrophe. Continuing from that report, then I'll comment. Stephen Desch, scientist from, I believe, UC Arizona, has come up with a novel solution to the problem that now beset the Arctic. He and a team of scientists, a team of colleagues from Arizona State University, want to replenish the region's shrinking ice by building 10 million wind-powered pumps over the Arctic ice cap. In winter, these would be used to pump the water to the surface of the ice where it would freeze and thicken the cap. Think about what I just said. How incredibly preposterous is such a proposal? How much fossil fuel burned and put into the atmosphere would it take to build 10 million wind-powered water pumps? How absurd is this? Pumps that would pump the cold water from the seafloor, allowing warm water to penetrate the seafloor, thawing even more methane, which migrates to the sea surface and into the atmosphere, creating even more warming. How is it possible that we have quote-unquote scientists that are paid with taxpayer money to come up with such unbelievably impossible and ridiculous quote-unquote potential solutions? And all of these types of headlines are designed to distract people from what they are obviously doing and have obviously been doing, is to spray light reflecting particles into the atmosphere as part of solar radiation management. But they throw these unimaginably ridiculous proposals out to distract and confuse the population. What rational human being could come up with such an unbelievably ludicrous quote-unquote solution? 10 million wind-powered pumps in the Arctic. Another headline, humans causing climate change 170 times faster than natural forces. Hear this a lot. The climate changes, it's natural, it's always happened. We're back to the argument I've given over and over. It's like putting a gun to somebody's head, pulling the trigger and saying people die, it's natural. It's completely irrational and illogical to think that the human race could do what it's done to the planet and not have a negative response. It's completely irrational. And if you've convinced yourself that everything happening is natural, it's not natural to destroy nearly 2/3 of Earth's forests since the dawn of civilization, poison the ocean, pave the planet, and poison the entire atmosphere, now at an unimaginable pace with climate engineering. Can't do all that and not have a response. From this headline I just read, climate change happening 170 times faster, which climate engineering is making worse, not better. It's not mitigating it, it's exacerbating it. From that report, researchers behind the Anthropocene, that's the age of humans that we're in right now, researchers behind the Anthropocene equation say impact of human activity on Earth far exceeds that of natural events spread across millennia. Quote, the human magnitude of climate change looks more like a meteorite strike than gradual change. Failure to reduce anthropological climate change could trigger societal collapse, the research report concluded. We're back to the same sort of statements from scientists. If you leap off a 100-story building, you could get hurt. Why can't they tell the truth? Even if their paychecks and pensions depend on them not telling the truth, at what point do they find their honor and tell the truth? Of course, if we stay on this path, societal collapse will occur, and it is occurring right now. And the degree at which the planet is changing is not just climate change, it's an abrupt climate shift, which climate engineering, again, is making far worse, not better. The planet must be allowed to respond on its own if we're to have any chance. Another headline, this is from last Saturday, from February 11th. Oklahoma hits 100 degrees in the dead of winter. How many saw that headline? Well, the Weather Channel paid liars, and that's exactly what they are at the Weather Channel. They are paid liars. Sue me for saying that, Weather Channel, if you think you can. Your meteorologists are one of two things. They're either unimaginably ignorant of what's happening in the sky above them on a subject in which they claim to be experts, or they're lying. One of the two. Why do I say this? because they spend their days theatrically trying to convince us how cold it is in various parts of the world with their theatrically named, chemically nucleated, completely engineered winter storms. Winter Storm Pluto, one of the most recent, and they don't talk much about the 100 degrees in Oklahoma. A little bit, they mention here and there, and when they report on high temperatures, by the way, half the United States can be at record high temperatures, and they report only a few dozen highs. Why is that? If it was record cold that was engineered, they would report thousands of record colds, because that confuses the population. When they see more record colds than record warm, even though there are far more record warm temperatures happening, it confuses them slightly. People need to pay attention to their own sense of reason and look at the wider horizon, look at frontline sources of data. So back to the Weather Channel, they are paid to confuse and divide the population. They work for the power structure. They're power structure owned. Bain Capital, Blackstone, etc. Rothschilds owns other weather dissemination agencies. Monsanto owns others. All power structure owned, all connected with the climate engineers, all designed to make you think that the completely engineered winter is in some way, shape, or form natural, when it is not. Now, Mr. Trump, where does he fit into this equation? As we've gone a little bit into his administration so far, and the signs we see are frankly not good. It indicates that his actions are in many ways supporting what we know the geoengineers would want him to support. And this is disturbing, but not unexpected. The whole election process, when we know it's controlled, why would we somehow think that something has happened that wasn't controlled? I'm just asking you to consider that fact. That's all. It doesn't mean I had in any way supported Hillary Clinton. I can't even imagine that criminal at the office either. But I'm saying it doesn't mean that we're out of the woods, because we certainly are not. Headline: Trump's energy plan doesn't mention solar, an industry that just added 51,000 jobs. This is a double-edged sword as well. For those who think that we can burn up all the fossil fuel, destroy the planet, and switch to solar, and everything will be fine. Not true. Not true. And I'm on solar, as many know. Background in solar, completely off-grid for 15 years. It's an energy extender. It's not quote-unquote renewable. It takes a great deal of fossil fuel to generate a solar panel, and certainly a wind turbine, a great deal. But climate engineering, for the record, as I've stated before, diminishing all three major forms of renewable energy, quote-unquote renewable: solar, wind, and hydro. Climate engineering reduces direct sunlight, alters convection, therefore reduces wind, and alters precipitation overall, reduces rain. Doesn't mean there's not deluges. Don't think in all this or that scenarios. Because something has a certain effect, it doesn't mean that that effect is total and absolute all the time. That's not reality. Of course there'll be deluges. On a warming planet, we must have more rain overall. The only thing slowing that down, which is not a positive, is climate engineering. Climate engineering is disrupting the Earth's attempt to respond to the damage done. Another headline: gag orders on scientists set stage for more, quote, alternative facts. This is relating to what the Trump administration has just done, gagging even more scientists. We already have National Weather Service and NOAA scientists gagged, now we have more. From that report, a flurry of news articles today reported that scientists and other officials at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Health and Human Services have been ordered in varying ways not to speak to the press. Also ordered not to speak to members of Congress or the public about what they do and what their research has found. Clearly, this is an attack on science. Not that I have a great deal of respect for the academic community or the sciences that are pretending climate engineering isn't going on, but this is not a step forward, it's a step backward. It's an attack on the public's right to know. These scientists and the department staff work for the taxpayers of the United States. We pay for their work, and we, the public, the press, and also members of Congress, should have a right to know about that work, period. Another headline in the same vein: Congress to curtail methane monitoring. Quote, Trump signs law rolling back disclosure rule for energy and mining companies. Who would not want the public to know the severity of damage done to the climate system? Obviously, the fossil fuel industry, big oil, the corporate business as usual, military industrial complex. Who is trying to hide the severity of the planet, of damage done to the planet, while inflicting even more damage at the same time? Climate engineers. All of this fits together, and it's important we understand that. The signs we see do not bode well at all. Not unexpected. But we should see things for what they are and not look through a tainted lens with some delusion about any individual somehow making it through a rigged election system and fixing everything. That's not a clear view of reality. Another headline titled Crime and Heavy Metal. This relates back to climate engineering, what's happening with the population, what we're breathing, and the potential human psychological effects. A group of researchers at Dartmouth College says the presence of lead and that of a similar heavy metal, manganese. Manganese has been detected in our precipitation tests, appears to be a part of the aerosol operations, whether intentionally or a byproduct. If a base material like coal fly ash is in fact being used for climate engineering, which looks likely, in fact, some testing done by a former nuclear physicist, and that testing was initially peer-reviewed, but later rescinded. This is Dr. Marvin Herndon. I know Dr. Herndon, and I believe his testing was valid. And the chemical signature of the precipitation tests matched almost exactly the chemical signature of coal fly ash. Why would those in power use coal fly ash as a base material for climate engineering? There are many reasons. One, it's a very abundant material. Two, it contains many of the elements that they want for climate engineering anyway, highly toxic elements, but again, those in power never take the consequences into account. Three, it gives them plausible denial that whenever these massive amounts of contaminants are found, they can simply blame it on the fallout from coal-fired power plants. But when we see the massive amounts of aluminum, which is part of coal fly ash, but the amounts we see appear much higher than we would expect with anything that has not been augmented with additional aluminum. The amounts of aluminum we see coming down in precipitation are staggeringly high when we see some of the world's most recognized geoengineers like Dr. David Keith stating on the record his goal, their goal, the geoengineers' goal, to put 20 million tons of aluminum into the atmosphere annually. Why would we not connect all of these dots? And when manganese is in this mix as well, and we know the psychological effect of manganese, we know the toxic effect of aluminum, of mercury. Mercury also an element in coal fly ash, and you start considering the synergistic toxicity of all these metals being combined. Now let's look at vaccinations, more of the same metals combined being injected into us. It's a wonder that our bodies can even survive this onslaught. It's a wonder that life on Earth can survive this, but in fact, life on Earth is no longer surviving. It's crashing, it's plummeting in every direction, from marine ecosystems to terrestrial ecosystems. We're seeing a collapse of the biosphere. This is not my opinion. This is a statistical mathematical fact. For anyone who cares to do frontline research, close the sports section of the paper and find out what's going on around you while it still matters, while it can still make a difference. I want to follow up on a headline from last week that relates to the biosphere collapse. The whale die-off in New Zealand. I didn't have time to really cover that last week. I want to mention a few things about that now. So we have nearly 500 whales beaching themselves on the shores of New Zealand. Back to the fossil fuel industry, back to the military-industrial complex, back to those who don't want you to know how bad it is and how rapidly it's happening. We know that seismic sounding ships have been in waters off New Zealand. It's the fossil fuel industry searching the seafloor for yet more fossil fuel deposits. We know the U.S. military operates off New Zealand, much to the disdain of the New Zealand population. We know that their sonar devices are immensely harmful to marine life. Why would we not think this is all related? And isn't it interesting, the cataclysms that continue to happen in New Zealand? The more New Zealand shows its resistance to this type of activity, the more they're decimated. So not only has Christchurch been hammered with another earthquake recently, devastating, now fires are wiping them out. Catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe. And I want to remind listeners of the coincidence that John Kerry left New Zealand only 2 hours prior to the last major quake and the previous major quake in 2011, in which U.S. diplomats were in the quake epicenter zone, but for reasons unknown decided that they had to leave In spite of having scheduled meetings the day of the quake, they left and relocated before that quake occurred. Is that a coincidence? The ionosphere heaters, these are microwave transmitters all over the globe. And if those signals that are unimaginably powerful are bounced off the atmosphere, which can be done due to the reflective aerosol electrically conductive particles, and those signals are concentrated in seismically sensitive zones, they can cause heating, even on the seafloor, subsurface. Are in fact these events connected? I'm only asking people to consider the possibility. I don't claim to know. I can't have proof of something like this. But when we have, as I have stated in previous shows, institutions like MIT stating on the record that anomalous and unexplainable atmospheric heating occurred directly above the epicenter of the Japanese quake. Again, they can't explain this because they can't mention the ionosphere heaters. It's not allowed. Why would we think that this is not a possibility when we have government scientists like Ken Caldera stating on the record? We have a recording of this. It's at geoengineeringwatch.org. If you search geoengineeringwatch.org Ken Caldera, you will find his statement that his job for the government was to try to find ways of creating natural disasters like tsunamis. That was his job. You can hear him state it in his own voice. And by the way, Ken Caldera, who is one of the prime public disinformation tools for the power structure to deny that climate engineering is occurring or going on. Ken Caldera, who orchestrated the bogus survey of 77 scientists who claimed chemtrails weren't real and publicized that everywhere, including our local papers in Shasta County. The Record, Searchlight, and KRCR published that false and bogus survey. And when the geoengineeringwatch.org legal team surveyed the same 77 scientists and 1,430 more scientists, totaling 1,500 scientists, and we publicized their names and contacts, so you know that this survey was real, and you're welcome to contact them yourself. So all 1,500 of those scientists, including the 77 that said chemtrails weren't real, when asked if they would deny that solar radiation management, geoengineering, was not occurring, they refused to deny it. They refused to deny climate engineering had already been deployed. Do your research, do your homework, denial won't save you. I want to move on to elaborate again. Our situation depends on a biosphere that supports life, period. That biosphere is losing its ability to support life, and a science condition called global dimming is occurring at an astounding rate. Here's from a report on global dimming, titled, "What is global dimming?" Global dimming is defined as the decrease in the amounts of solar radiation reaching the surface of the Earth. The byproduct of fossil fuels are tiny particles or pollutants. Of course, climate engineering will not be mentioned in this because it's not allowed from any source of science to mention the intentional spraying of particles into the atmosphere as part of solar radiation management. So that won't be mentioned here. So it blames all the atmospheric particulates on fossil fuel particles, which absorb solar energy and reflect back sunlight into space. This phenomenon was first recognized in the year 1950. Scientists believe that since 1950, the sun's energy reaching the Earth has dropped a total of an enormous 22%. This causes high risk to our environment. Of course it does. Of course it does. But the geoengineers don't consider that. And why don't we hear about global dimming? Why don't we hear the environmental groups discussing this issue? And how obvious could it be? That's what got me into this battle 15 years ago, to which I've devoted my entire life. The fact that I moved to the Pacific Northwest looking for clean air, expecting to find clean air because I grew up in a smog-laden Southern California. And when I began to lose 60, 70, 80% of my solar panel uptake on my off-grid home from whatever these aircraft were leaving behind, they would fill the whole sky, as all of us have seen, blocking on some days 70 to 80% of my solar power uptake. And yet we don't have that mentioned in these types of reports. Where is the truth? Where is the sense of honor in the climate science community? And even if you are faced with losing your employment, you have an obligation to your children, to humanity, to the web of life, and to the whole, to tell the truth and stop lying. Stop denying what's happening in our skies. single greatest environmental assault ever launched by the human race. And as this report states, causing high risk to the environment. And we're back to the risk portion. We're back to the scientists stating things like it would be a risk to leap out in front of a speeding semi. It's not a risk, it's suicide. And the same is true with climate engineering. This report continues, aerosols have been found to be the major cause of global dimming. No surprise, I just outlined that. The burning of fossil fuels again blames everything on the fossil fuel industry, although they are behind climate engineering, which makes them still responsible. Emits byproducts such as sulfur dioxide, soot, ash. How about aluminum, manganese, barium? The report continues, these together form particle pollution, primarily called aerosols. Aerosols act as a precursor to global dimming. None of this is a surprise. This is the stated goal of climate engineering, to use jet aircraft to spray aerosols into the atmosphere to block the sun with no comprehension or no consideration of the consequences, which are already far beyond cataclysmic. 70 years this has been going on. And when this report states that they first recognized this effect in 1950, as I've stated in show after show after show, historical data indicates the deployment of climate engineering happened at full scale in about 1945. All these dots connect. Every single dot connects. What does it take to wake the population up? And the bottom line is this. No matter what people choose to focus their time on, their efforts, their energy, whatever they choose to prioritize, if we have a planet that won't support life, that's the end of the road. We see economists with charts and with projections about retirement accounts and what will happen when and how many years and how long will Social Security last. None of that matters. Another headline to plug into this theme, quote, scientists have just detected a major change to the Earth's oceans linked to a warming climate. If the oceans die, we die. Again, all these separate ecosystems are necessary. Ozone layer, necessary. Forests, necessary. Living oceans, necessary. All of these are disintegrating. And whenever we have a discussion of the climate, it is not legitimate unless or until climate engineering is discussed first and foremost in that discussion, which of course academia is not allowed to do. And we have to get past the point of what they're allowed or not. They simply have to do it and not be an order follower, period. No habitat, no food, no people. That's very simple. From this report, climate change is poised to affect the world's food supply in three ways, experts say. There will be impacts on the quality, quantity, and location of the food we produce. This final statement in this report, I'm skipping to the end, we never needed to increase food production more rapidly than we do today to keep up with global demand. We don't have food production increasing, it's crashing. We have fisheries crashing. We have crop production crashing. And with very few exceptions, this is the case across the board. How can the perpetual growth continue? How can the perpetual population expansion continue on a finite planet with finite resources that are already crashing now? It's not tomorrow. It's not off on the horizon somewhere. It's happening now. Of all the stories I could cover, what corporate media covers, all the meaningless created theater and drama, it all comes back to the core factor on which we should all be focused on, a planet that supports life. Forgive me for a rant in the final segment of this show, but I feel that I have to say the things I say. Even if some have heard it before, perhaps it needs to be heard again, because our time is running out. If a significant percentage of the human race does not immediately and completely awaken to the profound peril of our current course, if we do not immediately and completely alter this course, the chapter of the human race on planet Earth will very soon be over. As I stated, our oceans are dying. Our forests are dying. Our planet is dying. This is mathematical, statistical fact. Stock market numbers, graphs, charts, retirement accounts, all is a moot point if the current course continues. If Earth dies, we die. Our children die. Countless life forms which have managed to survive thus far will also die. And I realize how difficult this type of news is to hear. I realize most don't want to hear it to begin with, let alone hear it again and again. But what does it take to get the point across that unless or until we face reality completely without turning away, unless we do this, we have no chance? Bringing this line of thought to a full circle, again I ask this: why are we here? Are we islands in and of ourselves, or are we part of something incomprehensibly greater? Will we choose to show our love for the children and the web of life by our actions? Or are such sentiments only words? Will we simply give up because the odds seem overwhelmingly against us? Or will we make the critical, important decision to devote ourselves to making a difference for the better, for the greater good, no matter how dark the horizon is before us? And even at this late hour, we could yet make a profound leap in the right direction, a profound leap toward preserving what's yet left of our planet's once thriving life support systems. As stated in last week's show, I realize so many Americans can't believe anything I'm saying because, again, the shelves are stocked full in Costco, Walmart, or wherever it is they shop. But as I disclosed last week, tens of billions of dollars worth of food are being imported from all over the world to keep those shelves stocked while much of the rest of the world starves. The delusion cannot be maintained much longer. So if we are to preserve what's left of Earth's life support systems, if we are to salvage what may be yet left of a future for our children, such an effort will take all of us working together. A headless, heartless, soulless cancer has always existed within the ranks of our species. A cancer of willful, feel-good ideologies. And not that we don't want to feel good. All of us want to enjoy our lives. But if the manner in which we're choosing to enjoy our lives is destroying any chance of a future for our posterity and for the rest of the planet, can we justify that? And this is the society that we've been trained in, the Budweiser get it while you can mentality before it's all gone. This is a cancer of comfort zone denial. And if we're to collectively have any chance of surviving, even in the short-term horizon, this cancer, this mentality must be cured. It must be cured. The majority of our race must be awakened to our willfully blind suicidal tendencies. The majority of our race must find the motivation to do their respective part in the fight for the greater good, in the fight to salvage what is yet left of Earth's life support systems, in the fight to preserve some semblance of a future for our children to whom we owe our lives. So many in the human race have long since forgotten that they are part of a whole, not separate from it, not detached from it, but interwoven with it. So many in the human race have long since forgotten that we have only one planet, that we are one, and that we will sink or swim together. So what do we do? If you're awake, if you care about what you now know is unfolding, if you truly and sincerely care, then that caring must extend beyond words. It must involve prioritized action toward the greater good without a guarantee of the results. Too many people in our world today refuse to take any action unless they can be given a guarantee of success, but life holds no such guarantee. Life itself is a seasonal occupation. The season is short under the best of circumstances, and it's about to get a lot shorter for all of us on the current course. Again, not my opinion, not conjecture, not theory, but statistical, mathematical fact for those who choose to look at those facts. And I've been highly criticized over and over for not giving an ABC equation to fix everything. Just do A and B and C, and everything will go back to the way it was. And that's what people want to hear. They want someone to tell them if they just take step 1, 2, and 3, everything will be fine again. And I can't say that. I'm not saying I don't deserve criticism for maybe many things, but I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best. This is all I do about 80 hours a week because it's intolerable for me to live on a planet under a toxic sky with ecosystems imploding all around me. And it's impossible for me to look my children in the eyes and not give every bit of my life's energy to trying to correct this course in any way I possibly can, no matter how daunting the odds. But if we all stood together, those odds would change. We would alter the equation. But it takes all of us, and there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee of success. But there is a guarantee that whatever happens, we will know we did our best to make a difference for the better, for the greater good. We did our best to be a part of the whole, a responsible part of the whole. If we are to change this course, we must awaken a critical mass of the population to our common plight. We must awaken them to the cancerous power structure and societal paradigm that is dictating our current course of near-term planetary omnicide. It's not just those in power. It's the population also who bears much of the responsibility, a population that in general so far has not wanted to know the truth, let alone been willing to do anything about what's happening. That paradigm must change. This is the first and most important and most essential step. Each and every one of us has a profound and critical part to play. But we must not only choose to accept this profound responsibility, we must fully embrace this all-important calling toward the greater good. And though we face countless and dire, daunting challenges, we must first plug the largest hole in the bottom of the boat, the highly toxic and unimaginably destructive global climate engineering, weather warfare, assault, which amounts to biological warfare also, because, as I've stated countless times, the toxicity of these materials that are being used in these programs is immense. It's absolutely immense, and it's raining down on everything. It's bioavailable, so it's absorbed in everything. It's bioaccumulative, so it builds up in living organisms, including ourselves. So if we look mathematically at the total decimation being caused by climate engineering, we must consider it the greatest and most immediate challenge we face short of nuclear cataclysm. And for those that challenge the statement I just made, those that understand how serious Fukushima is, and I've acknowledged that myself, and how serious many of the other environmental challenges we face are, I don't deny any of that. I don't deny the anthropogenic damage to the climate from countless sources. We put 100 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere a day. We've decimated our forests. We're spraying chemicals on everything. We're paving the planet. I don't deny any of that. But I'm simply asking everyone to consider what is the greatest and most immediate challenge we face. And for those that, as I stated a moment ago, would deny that climate engineering is that challenge, I would ask you to consider this. Consider that every breath you take is laden with the highly toxic heavy metal and chemical fallout from the climate engineering insanity. And not only are these elements rapidly eroding our cognitive abilities, our ability to think clearly, and our physical health, they're also contaminating the entire planet. They're decimating the atmosphere and Earth's overall life support systems. This is a statistical, verifiable fact. What challenges can any of us face if we are chronically ill, if we can't think clearly, if we don't have a functional biosphere? We must prioritize our time and energies. Exposing and halting the climate engineering assault is the greatest leap we could collectively make in the right direction at this late hour. So again, I would ask this: what will your priorities be? What do you care most about? On what will you spend the time that is yet still allotted to you? Stand up and join the ranks of those that are committed to exposing the greatest untold story of our time, climate engineering. If we can expose it, We can stop it. Share credible information with others. You can download informational flyers from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for free. There's activist instructions. There are prepackaged informational links to send to groups, agencies, individuals who would care if they only knew. Arm yourself with credible data. Help us to sound the alarm. Bring this issue to light so we can bring it to a halt. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.